Since the late 90s, Shawn Tuma has been working with legal departments and security teams at the intersection of law and technology. This has given him a unique perspective for how these important defenders work well together and do not work well together, and what a difference that can make with how their organizations manage cyber risk. This led him to write a book called the GC+CISO Connection to help start a dialogue and strengthen the partnership between these critically important roles. The next step is to bring together people who understand these roles to share their experiences and continue the dialogue. Because none of us have all the answers, it is through conversations like these that we can all improve how we work together to improve cyber resilience. This is the GC+CISO Connection Show.
Hello and welcome to the GC+CISO Connection Show. I'm your host, Shawn Tuma. Joining me today is my good friend, Bryce Carter, CISO extraordinaire, leadership guru, and CISO for the City of Arlington, Texas. Bryce, welcome to the show.
Thank you. You're too kind.
Well, you've earned it. You've earned it. You put up with me at Secure World, and so we had so much fun there that I thought it would be a great idea for us really to come back here and continue our conversation. So,
absolutely.
First, before we talk about leadership, which I know is a big passion of yours, tell us a little bit about your role as a CISO and your background and kind of what helped you move into this role.
Yeah, I'll say that, the CISO role for me was kind of an accident in a way. And I think a lot of CISOs can kind of relate to that. I would say earlier in my career, I was actually a pre-med student and knock on wood. Yeah.
Okay, that's a different direction.
It's a U-turn. And, why I was volunteering at the hospital, and I think I volunteered for over 5 years, I really saw how all these devices were keeping people alive. I mean, I volunteered in pediatrics, I volunteered in outpatient surgery, and I think that's where the passion started. But I've always kind of been in IT, and I've always loved leading. So it was kind of a natural fit, and I eventually decided, although I was getting ready to go into med school, I took a step back, and I was like, well, I'm going to continue on my path. And I went and moved a little bit closer to family. I worked for a small county in Kansas for a while, did all their technology and cybersecurity. And then later took a vacation for once in 5 years. You know how that goes.
Yeah.
And I went to Bellingham, Washington, which is absolutely natural beauty, bar none, just beautiful place, absolutely beautiful place. And then eventually I kind of got recruited to come here in the City of Arlington to be their Chief Information Security Officer. But I've been leading security for quite some time. I will say, I'm actually a former startup founder as well. So I left that out.
Got a lot going on there.
Yeah, I left that out of the story. And then in addition to that, for about 8 years concurrently, I also served in interim roles as CIO and CISO for various different organizations. But I'm mostly focused on healthcare and utilities.
Yeah. So what was your startup? What was that about?
It was a startup advertising company. So it was we had a machine learning based, but likewise it was a privacy focused advertising platform.
Wait, so advertising and privacy, those go together?
Yeah. Knock on wood. Yeah. I mean, we were trying to be, the disruptors in the marketplace because you saw, like Google and whatnot, and they're mammoths and they're collecting so much data about you. And it was like, there's got to be a better way to do this. So we used machine learning and attributes that weren't necessarily attributable directly to individuals. And it still delivered the same amount of results. And there's some conspiracy theory behind, the actual idea, but the company was called FlyPage. And then eventually, once we sold out, that's when I decided I was going to get back into the medical field.
Okay, so you got into the medical field, and is that when you got into the security side of things?
I think it kind of started with FlyPage because privacy, security, those things were part of our core values. And I mean, things that I kind of value just sort of in general. There was also some times where we had one of my first companies, because I was also managing director of a company that had a bunch of different startups under it. One of those startups got their website defaced. So basically, it kind of looks like, the Russian hackers take over the website. And it was mostly because they didn't update, a content management system kind of thing. And that's sort of where it started to take root. And I was like, you know what? I don't want this to happen to anyone else. Yeah. Although it was very minor, it still was kind of like, okay, that's something that's actually meaningful to me. And then once I made that relationship between that and healthcare, I mean, it became part of it.
Yeah. So what was your role in security and healthcare? How did that evolve?
Yeah, I think, while I was concurrently going to, while I was concurrently a pre-med student, I also decided that I was going to serve in interim roles. And I had a friend of mine that was kind of like the Mr. Fix-It of distressed organizations kind of thing. And, anytime an organization is distressed, so it could be, they're filing for bankruptcy, things like that. I mean, most of the people they walk.
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
And then, but
yeah, it's hard to get someone to stay at a company and you can't guarantee you're going to pay them.
Exactly. So with that, he kind of mentioned to me, he was like, hey, do you want to serve in different interim roles? And I was like, sure. Why I concurrently had, a couple startups and I was, pre-med. It was chaotic. My life was chaos. And that's where it really kind of started to take root. I kind of started in the CIO position. And then that's when I think cybersecurity really started coming to fruition.
So when are we looking at here? Like how far back? Because Bryce, you look really young. I mean, you're very blessed in that regard. How long have you been doing this?
About 20 years.
Okay. Wow.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. And I don't know how I stay young. I think it's the hiking.
Yeah. Well, I can do it. Fresh air. Right?
Oh yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. How many years back was that? How many years have you been in this role?
So that was about, I'd say 15 years ago when I started doing the interim roles, 20 years ago when I started the startups.
Yeah. Okay. Wow. Awesome. Okay. So bring us forward now to your role with City of Arlington.
Yeah. So, most people come into government, they're like, oh, okay, that's an easy, cush job. And it's like, it is not. It is total opposite of that, because you think about a city, a lot of things just like, oh, it's the people that tax me. And while that is true, we do collect taxes. We also have our water utility, we have public safety, we have a lot of mission critical operations. So you just think about all the water that flows to your house, all the water that flows to all the stadiums, businesses, the GM plant. All of those things can, cost our economy money.
Oh, I mean, for sure. And, we think about municipalities and the critical infrastructure and the risks that go along with that. But you have an added layer of that because Arlington has a lot going on.
We sure do.
We have a couple of sports. I mean, the Dallas Cowboys. We've got Texas Rangers. We've got with the F1 coming. I mean, all kind of stuff going out there.
Yeah, and then we also have the World Cup coming up, which lots and lots of preparation for that. Lots and lots of preparation.
Yeah. So you have evolved quite a bit in your career path.
Yeah.
Any thoughts on advice you could give to other people who are thinking about maybe evolving from where they are into other roles, just lessons to be learned from that?
Yeah, I think a lot of tech people, they have challenges from a leadership and soft skills perspective. And that's kind of a dynamic shift that we at the city have kind of taken on the cybersecurity front. So we dropped most degree requirements for most of our entry-level folks. And we also have emphasized the soft skills during the hiring process because, the hard skills, the technical skills, those are important, but they aren't everything. And the soft skills are really what moves things. And as security professionals and as security leaders, our job is to influence. And that only happens when you have great leadership skills and, you can be empathetic towards others. Things like that. I think that is our challenge at security right now. So I would say focus on developing those skills.
Yeah. Now, speaking of those skills, you are a student of leadership. You are a teacher of leadership. Tell us about your role in that and kind of how that came about.
Yeah. So a couple of months ago, I decided that I was going to embark on a journey to become an adjunct professor at Grand Canyon University.
Is that so you can go hiking out there?
Well, I moved here from the Pacific Northwest. Now that was some great hiking, but no, it was largely because I really want to give back at this point in my career. It's hard to believe because people look at me, they're like, "You look 12." Yeah, well, fair game, yes. But I'm already at a point where I'm like I want to start giving back, and so I'm teaching business courses, but one of those is servant leadership. And I think that's so important. We struggle with, making our teams recognized, and we'd like to be the acceptor of awards and things like that. And at the end of the day, what brings me gratification and where I want my legacy to be is in my team.
Yeah. Now, I mean, we've talked about the theme of the show is the collaboration between legal and cyber, and how we can better work together in cyber and legal as a team together. And actually, in my book, in chapter 3, I actually talked about leadership. And while it didn't cover a lot of pages, when I was planning like the concept of the book, if there was like 3 to 5 top issues I wanted to talk about that really motivated it, leadership was in probably the top 3, because I feel like in my work, it's so evident to me when I'm working with a company, either how strong their leadership is from the cyber team perspective or legal, or how weak it is. And that concept of servant leadership is so challenging for many of us to grasp because we don't always understand what that means. Like, to you, what does servant leadership mean?
It's putting your team first. I mean, that's honestly the gist of it, and making sure you're helping them grow, and honestly taking a step back and letting them fail every once in a while. And at the end of the day, that's how we grow. And, I think it's also getting them the resources that they need to rise and be the next CISO.
Yeah, I really love that, Bryce, because number one, in my role, I have a team, my team of lawyers that work with me, and we have those same challenges, of how do you give someone enough space to grow and to have a vested interest, yet also not have some catastrophic failure, that's going to harm our clients, because we obviously can't do that. But it's a fine line of balance between some people want to micromanage and do everything because they think that's the right way. And then some people are like, nope, hands off, you deal with it. Mm-hmm. And it seems like it's more in the middle.
Yeah, I think it's our job to be mentors. Right. So giving them high level advice on, hey, this is what I did before, totally bombed it. Right. And so that way they can kind of learn from your experience as well. And then kind of giving them the right trajectory on where they need to be going. And you'd be surprised how small that failure can be. I mean, obviously you want some guardrails to make sure it's like, you don't want to have like a data breach or anything like that causes more harm than what we're, trying to do long term. But I think in general, right, it's pointing them in the right direction.
Mm-hmm. I struggled with this personally on my team of micromanaging a lot several years back. And I was listening to a book by Jocko Willink on leadership. And he talked about decentralized command and the concept of making sure you're clear on what your goals and objectives are and your intent, but then letting your team have the freedom to figure out how to go and accomplish that, and one of the things he suggested that I found very helpful is to give them the objective and then say, now you go prepare the plan and then come back to me and let's talk about the plan. Yep. And that's where you can step in and educate and then, okay, go execute.
Yeah. I think one of the most powerful things, and this actually comes out of Brene Brown's book. So she teaches at, I think it's the University of Houston. And one of the things in her book as well is that they talk about, maybe seeing what that end goal looks like. So, give me a vision of what that actually looks like in the end, and then kind of letting them ride from there on out. I love that book because it's just it emphasizes soft skills so much.
Yeah.
And I think it's just so ingrained in everything we do. And you talk about, when you're writing your book, you're like, well, yeah, it was like one of the top things. Throughout your book, although I skimmed it, I haven't read the full thing.
Totally understandable.
Time is limited, but the skimming I did do, right, you can see little parts of leadership kind of embedded in that. And I think that's the kind of culture we want to create. And I think more as even like the pandemic and things like that, the soft skills have tanked a lot. So I think as leaders, we need to be creating the next generation of leaders.
Yeah, and I mean, like, what are some things you teach on how to do that? Like some techniques and.
So the number one is getting outside your comfort zone. If you're not moving in the right direction, if you're in your comfort zone.
Yeah.
So that is like my number one thing, and because people really like safety, psychological safety, but that gets you nowhere from a leadership perspective. Leadership is getting outside your comfort zone and doing something else that you wouldn't have done in just like a front line and I'm assigned to this one task kind of thing. Leadership is leading. I mean, just by definition, right? So,
and it's uncomfortable.
Yeah, I mean, you see all these startups, right? They lead the way to the industry. I mean, although Apple tends to follow up and make billions off of their idea, I mean, generally speaking, right? It's these innovators and the folks that want to really lead the industry and disrupt that will get outside of their comfort zone and try something different.
Mm-hmm. Bryce, one of the themes in the book, which has come about through my experience over the years, is that there's so many similarities between the path of cybersecurity professionals and the path of legal professionals, and that the nature of our roles, what we're doing, we're in the world of risk. There are no absolutes a lot of times, like those challenges. But one of the things that really struck me as I was writing, I thought about, is how we start out living in the minutia, in the weeds, like we're in all the details, right? And then as we progress in our career, we evolve to become less tactical and more strategic.
Yep.
Is that something that you're seeing, and how can we help coach people in that?
I think that's a challenge of CISOs, because back in the day, it was just kind of a technical role reporting to the CIO, right? And now it's become, we really need to get this into the boardroom kind of thing. But that means you're empowering your teams that are doing the more technical frontline work, and you've got to take a step back. You might still have those skills, but at the end of the day, you're a leader. So I think that is sort of the challenge of our industry right now, is just because we have so many CISOs that have kind of grown up into this mentality that they are also the technical leaders. But that's really not their role, in modern day. So I think some of it too is just, the way we hire for some of these roles, right? So if you're a CIO and you're hiring a new CISO, right, you need to be hiring for the soft skills. If that job description has a whole bunch of technical knowledge in there, I mean, yes, you should have some of it. It should be high level, though, at the end of the day. And although I still have the technical knowledge, and yes, I've done some hands-on work in the past, I even though I could today, I don't do it. I don't do it because at the end of the day, that's your team's job, right?
As you're saying that, I remember back in the 1999 when, of course, I was a baby lawyer, so I'm living in the world of the minutia. And I remember I was talking to a general contractor that built houses, and he said, if I'm out here swinging a hammer, there's something wrong with how this is working. That sounds like kind of what you're talking about.
Yeah, I mean, and I think the CISO's roles has evolved to actually get support, get buy-in, and then create, this culture of security across an organization. And that is some powerful leadership skills that you need to move that needle.
It really, it is, because one of the things we hear, the themes over and over, is that the CISO needs to have a direct channel to the board, because the CISO's in charge of cyber risk. And if the board wants the most accurate interpretation of cyber risk, to get it straight from the horse's mouth, it's got to come from the CISO, right?
Yep. Yeah. I mean, I would say the board, and then your CEO. Your CEO ultimately isn't accountable for everything, but then your board is the ultimate accountability. It's a little bit different in government, where we have a city manager's office and things like that. It's just a little bit different from a political perspective. But I will say, at the end of the day, it's making sure that we're making informed decisions about cyber risk, and that is a board's, that is your CEO's sort of responsibility, is to make sure that there's some level of oversight. But you've got to be high level enough and to be able to actually relate back to the business objectives or our city objectives, so to speak.
And I think that's really the key, is when someone's in that role, it's a very strategic role, the duty of staying informed, of having oversight, and they think in broad terms.
Yes.
What is it? If a CISO or someone in that analogous role is presenting to them, are they getting down into all the weeds and the minutia and talking about this scan report and this many false positives? And
see, it shouldn't be that way. It should be related back to what you're trying to achieve. So what are some of the objectives across the organization? What is your strategic plan? What direction are we going as a business? And as a CISO, you need to be involved in the high level business discussions and things like that. So you're actually helping run the organization. Because at the end of the day, right, you don't create a cyber strategy that's based on some rando framework. It's at the end of the day, it needs to align with what you're actually trying to achieve. And I think that is the secondary challenge of the CISOs today, is they're like, oh, I'll align it with NIST cybersecurity frameworks that throw one out there. It's like, well, that's fantastic, but what does that mean for us as an organization?
Yeah, what is NIST cybersecurity?
Yeah, I mean, you bring that into the conversation, they're going to throw you out of the room.
Yeah, I was actually meeting with a client yesterday with their team on proactive security, more advisory work, and the CIO mentioned that their board has a couple of board members who had obtained the board cybersecurity certifications, and now they're highly interested in cybersecurity. And the challenges that can start coming about because of that, because now they know enough of the buzzwords to ask the questions, but they don't really know what it all means yet and how it fits together. How could a CISO handle that kind of challenge? Because I think we're going to see more of it.
Well, I mean, just like everything else, setting some clear boundaries between the board, because the board should not be involved in your operations. If they are, then you're never going to get anything done, like ever. They need to be a strategic oversight. So, they get into the weeds, they start talking about things like, I don't know, like zero trust or something like that. Well, whatever the buzzword is today, you need to have them take a step back and say, we need to look at this from a more strategic perspective. I mean, you should be looking at this from like a risk quantification, and then looking at, where that chart lays, make sure we're investing enough in security. I mean, their job is not to, get involved in the operational side of security.
Their job is not, but that does not mean they may not try.
They might try, but, having good relationships with those folks, right? Having good relationships with those and making sure you clearly set some of those boundaries. I mean, it's a delicate touch, but it can be done.
Well, that's bringing us right back to what you talked about with the soft skills.
Yes.
You can't be condescending. You can't. No. I mean, you can't do that.
You would have a job after that, though.
I mean, that's really bringing us back to the importance of those soft skills.
Absolutely. I mean, it's embedded in everything we do. Without that, you're not moving security forward in an organization.
One of the things I remember a law professor mentioning is you have to learn to be a master of the telescope and the microscope to be really good at your job. I think that's something the CISO has to do.
Yes.
Because when you're talking about that board member asking about zero trust, well, you got to know it well enough to go to the minutia and answer their questions.
Yes.
But then bring it back to the big.
Yeah, bring it back and make sure that they understand what their role is from as a board member perspective. And some of that is kind of setting the tone from the start, right? So whether it's in an organization's charter or whatnot, so you kind of lay out what those responsibilities kind of look like. Although I don't like to.
Which means you have to know them.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah, I mean you still have to know your stuff 100%. And you can't just like run into this role and be like, I've got great leadership skills. I've never been in security before. You're going to have a hard time. So you still have to balance both of those things. But at the end of the day, right, it's making sure they're doing their strategic oversight responsibilities and not necessarily micromanaging the operational side, because you know just as well as I do, if a board gets involved in the actual operations of stuff, everything slows down. And cyber's one of those things. You can come in tomorrow and the whole landscape's changed, and they need to entrust you to and you and your team to actually make sure you can adapt to that and not have to go to a board every time.
Yeah, and that was one of the things that we actually talked about yesterday was when the board wants to be involved in tabletops or wants very detailed, almost micromanaging reporting and communications, how to deal with that.
It's a challenge. I would say, so we do different tabletops at the city. So we actually have a IT technical tabletop, and then we have an executive tabletop. I would have no problem with them being an executive tabletop because in the middle of an incident, they're going to be involved in it, right, from a communications perspective and things like that. And that is true whether you're in the public, private sector. It's all about the same, right? So I would definitely bring them in for those type of things, so that way they're aware on what their role is during an incident. But again, I just go back to like if it actually gets into the operations of things, that's a road you don't want to go down.
It really is a challenge because I don't care what the subject matter is.
Yep.
When a board member speaks in the room with everyone else, it's kind of like the old E.F. Hutton commercial. When E.F. Hutton speaks, everyone else listens, right?
Yes. Yeah.
I mean, it kind of ends the discussion, and it's like, this is how it's going to be.
Well, yeah, I think that's where the relationships come into play, right? If you develop a good relationship with your board, and it's hard, right? Because they have fixed terms, especially in government. But if you have those good relationships with your board, they're not going to be dictators to you.
And that relationship, that's really the foundation of that.
Yeah.
And it's you have to trust them, they have to trust you, which means you don't. It happens over time. It's like any other relationship.
Yeah, I always tell board members, I was like, your job is to make sure we get enough money to do what we need to do, and then my job is to show you what our risk looks like and what that landscape looks like, and kind of keep you informed at a high level with the risks that we face.
Yeah.
And it's really not much more than that at the end of the day. And I think that's what I try to ingrain into their head, so we don't go down the rabbit hole that we're going to talk about zero trust during a board meeting today. It was like, well, that's not going to be a very productive board meeting.
Yeah. I mean, that's exactly right. And sometimes in my role, working with clients proactively, they'll ask me to come in and report to the board or whatnot, and they'll be on another board that had an incident for a company, or they'll hear their friends talk, and they'll want to ask about some of the most nuanced legal issues. And, you've got to explain it, but
Sure.
It has nothing to do with what we're really trying to do. But that's part of our goal of educating them and treating this as a big team.
Yeah, it's a continuous process. There's always going to be, the new buzzword today, and they want to talk about it, whether it's from a legal or cyber perspective, which are both pretty entwined these days.
And if we're listening and paying attention to them, we're learning what their concerns are.
Yeah.
And that helps us.
Yeah, most of the time, these issues can be addressed outside of the boardroom. But if your only interaction with the board is in the boardroom, that's where this all kind of comes in for fruition. So you need to make sure you have relationships outside of there.
Yeah. Well, Bryce, we're nearing the end, and I know, if you will, give us a couple of tips that CISOs, legal counsel, in-house legal people can learn from on how to be better leaders in cybersecurity to better work together?
Yeah, I mean, at the end of the day, it kind of comes back to collaboration. I know from a legal perspective, but lawyers don't like to get outside of their comfort zone. Nope. I mean, they really don't. They tend to stay kind of where they're at. But cyber is one of those things where you're always going to be outside of there because no matter what you do, you could still be attacked tomorrow by like a nation state, things like that. And there's no defenses that are going to hold up against it. You might be able to detect it and things like that, but that's par for the course. It doesn't mean you didn't get hacked, right?
Yeah.
And I think that's the hard part of cyber leadership. So I think it's, taking a step back, realizing that we can't 100% control our destiny in cyber. And then I'm still going to say it, getting outside your comfort zone and building relationships. I mean, the foundation of our job is trust and empathy.
Yeah.
Because, we have to understand what our business goals around it, but then be empathetic with those folks that, might be running our water utilities or our power company or things like that, right? So truly understanding what their needs are and then how they feel about things. So I would say 100% developing the soft skills.
Yeah. Bryce, that's to me, one of the parallels between legal and cyber is that we live in a world of risk. We can't usually give absolute answers. Everything we do is on that continuum of maybe, and it depends.
Yes.
And that's where we align so well when we stop to realize the similarities of our goals. And, like litigation is many times like getting hacked. You may do everything right. You should have won.
Yep.
The jury just went a different way and you don't know why. They're two very hard worlds to live in. And,
It's challenging, and that brings me to kind of next point is having good work-life balance. I mean, if you entrench your life in this, you're going to burn out like that. And
they stay young looking, right?
Well, I mean, that's why I'm always out hiking somewhere. Although there's not a lot of mountains in this area, I do go to Arkansas a lot. So, but making sure you have a good work-life balance, and whether that's making sure you cut off at 5 or and it's hard too because our job doesn't sleep in a way, and you could have things historically always happen on holidays, but just do your best to not overwork you and your team. I think that's important.
Yeah, you definitely have to care for your team in this. So, well, very good. Well, Bryce, thank you so much.
Absolutely.
Thoroughly enjoyed having you here. Join us on the show, and appreciate you sharing your insight and perspectives on cyber.
Thanks for having me on. It was a blast.
Well, we'll have to do this again.
Yep, anytime.
Very good. Okay. Well, with that, it's time for us to wrap up. And thank you all for joining us for this episode of the GC+CISO Connection. And I would like to encourage you to go and follow us on YouTube and LinkedIn and make sure and like and share our episodes with others. So thank you very much.